You're listening to the Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent talk.
Happy Wednesday evening, folks. This is Scotty Roberts. You're listening to my show, the Intrepid radio program, right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. That's ODYSY1.com. Come on over, see all the goodness that is Odyssey Radio. And at the same time, come on over and watch the video simulcast over on my YouTube channel, along with the live chat room, which is the best feature of the live video broadcast. And join the other Intrepids in the conversation. You can talk about what we're talking about tonight or other things, as you'll see many of the Intrepids over there do. And so come on over, join us at youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. And tonight, we're going to continue talking about the Magics of the Exodus. And we left off talking about the staff yesterday and the crocodiles and the interpretation of the word in the Hebrew that has been snakes when Moses dropped the staff and it turned into a snake, and the Egyptian magicians dropped their staves. They turned into snakes as well, and Moses' snake devoured the other two. Well, the word there for snake is not the word in Hebrew for snake, which is nakosh. It's the word timna. I don't have it in front of me. We'll get back to that, and I'll correct that if I'm wrong on that. Timan, I think it is, which is crocodile. And so there's a little misconception we've had due to interpretation of language. And I'll hit on that again as we get into it. But before we get started, I want to remember yesterday or a couple of days ago I mentioned this book, Black Elk Speaks. This is one of the foremost religious books. How would I categorize that? Not a religious book. It's a book about religion, about spirituality, about the spirituality of the Plains Indians from the Lakota tribe, and it's all about Black Elk and what he has to say, and it's poetry and other things that are added by the man who in the 1930s, John Nehard, had visited him on the reservation. And I was reading this morning, just rereading this. It's been years since I've read this book. And just in the foreword, I'm just going to read for you, and I posted this on my Facebook, this very profound opening paragraph to the newer foreword, newer meaning later 20th century, so maybe 20, 30 years ago. And it says this: the 20th century has produced a world of conflicting visions, intense emotions, and unpredictable events. And the opportunities for grasping the substance of life have faded as the pace of activity has increased. Electronic media shuffle us through a myriad of experiences which would have baffled earlier generations and seem to produce in us a strange isolation from the reality of human history. Our heroes fade into mere personality, and we're consumed and they're forgotten, and while we avidly seek more avenues to express our humanity. Reflection is the most difficult of all our activities because we're no longer able to establish relative priorities from the multitude of sensations that engulf us. Times such as these seem to illuminate the classic expressions of eternal truths, and great wisdom comes to stand out in the crowd of ordinary maxims. That's the opening to the foreword, the newer foreword to this book. Not the foreword written in the 30s, but the newer foreword that was written on a republication of this edition. And this book has stood as a go-to book on spirituality that has risen above all the others that came out in its time in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s and so on. This one has stood the test of time. And it's from the Native American spirituality of the Plains Indians, specifically from Black Elk, a Lakota. I don't think he was a chief. He was definitely I don't know if he was even a medicine man. But he wrote this book. He dictated and it was written. And so go pick that up, read it. I thought that was a profound opening, especially in light of what we experience now in the 21st century. And I started my foray into social media and electronic website development and things like that in the late 20th century, in the 1990s. But now we've seen where this has all gone, and those are very real truisms that were spoken in that opening paragraph. We've kind of let modern technology take over, and our heroes have faded into personalities and into nothingness, as opposed to reflection and looking back on these things and understanding them. So you might want to pick that little book up. I got this version for like $6. It's a used edition. You'd never know it other than the little barcode that's on the back stamp. But this little book is well worth reading. So I recommend picking it up. Black Elk Speaks. Now let's talk about something else out of history that has been relegated to the realm of what I would call bathrobes and bearded storybook characters. The people that lived and experienced life in Old Testament times. And we talked about the Exodus yesterday as being Moses and the Exodus. There's no reason to believe these weren't real people and these weren't real events. You can believe, along with believing that they actually happened, understand that there were some embellishments along the way, probably some dictates of religious morals and things that are put on top of them. But the story of the Exodus has stood for millennium as a story of emancipation, of liberty, of freedom. But there was more to it than that. And when we start looking at the plagues and we start looking at Moses and the events of the Exodus, we see a lot of ancient Egyptian magic that is incorporated into it. And you will find that, we found it in the staff of Moses we were talking about. And then we started getting to the snakes and crocodiles, which I mentioned. And I'm going to pick up that. The word is tannin. I think I said tamim or something like that at the beginning of the show because I didn't have the word in front of me. The word is tannin, where we have interpreted that as meaning Moses' rod, he turned into a snake, into a tannin, but it doesn't use the word nakosh for snake. It uses tannin, which is crocodile. And in Exodus 7, verses 10 through 11, it says, "So Moses and Aaron went into Pharaoh, and they did what the Lord had commanded them. And Aaron threw his staff in front of Pharaoh and his officials, and it became a serpent. Then Pharaoh also called for the wise men and sorcerers, and they came along with the Egyptian magicians and did the same thing with their secret arts." Now, the word for serpent is nakosh, and it's not used here in the Hebrew text. What's used is the term tannin, which translates as crocodile. And so it's interesting when you start looking at that. When Moses' staff first turns into a serpent or a crocodile, the correct Hebrew word nakosh is used. However, when they are finally before Pharaoh, now the nakosh was used remember when Moses is at the burning bush and God says, "I'll show you how you can show off my wonders. Throw your staff down." It turns into a nakosh, a serpent. But when he's in front of Pharaoh, the staff turns into a tannin, a crocodile. And so eventually, Pharaoh's chief lector priests duplicate the magic art by turning their own staves into crocodiles, only to watch in horror as Aaron and Moses' crocodile consumes its Egyptian counterparts. And it proves the authority of the Israelites and their Lord. That's what the account is supposed to do when you read it. It's supposed to put in your mind that God's power is greater than the power of the Egyptian magicians, the Heka. And with the Heka that they threw to the ground and that turned into crocodiles. Now, the idea of consuming something to gain its power, we talked about this yesterday, dates back to the pyramid texts, a millennium before the Passover. The Passover would have been around, if you take the dating system that seems to work the best and that I wrote about in our book, The Exodus Reality, 1445, 1446 is the date of the Exodus. You go back 1,000 years before that, all the way back into 2500, 2400 BCE. And we read out of those texts that Unis eats their magic and swallows their spirits. And in Egyptian magical parlance, to swallow something is to know something. I'm swallowing it. I'm taking it in. And to know someone is to have power over that person. And the idea of turning an inanimate object into a living crocodile is similarly as old as the pyramid texts. Crocodiles were a common element of Egyptian myth, and best personified by the god Sobek. You can look up Sobek and see some images of Sobek. This crocodile-headed god of crocodiles in the Nile waters was called the Lord of the Waters, and even featured in the Book of the Dead. And if the deceased wanted to turn into Sobek, they would have to just simply recite, "I am the crocodile who is terrifying. I am the crocodile god. I bring destruction." They were also important to the lector priests, who admired their raw, primeval power. And in the Heket, the Egyptian spiritual religion of their day. And we can find numerous images from Egyptian history of lector priests, pharaohs and deities that are all holding serpents and serpent-shaped staffs, now mirroring the image of Moses and Aaron as their Israelite equivalents. For example, from the tomb of the chapel of the Vizier Rechmir. Remember, we mentioned Rechmir yesterday, and I've been in the tomb of Rechmir. Rechmir was the Grand Vizier of the Pharaoh Tutmosis III, and also of his successor, his son, the young Amenhotep II, who I believe was the Pharaoh of the Exodus. And we talk about Rechmir as being a contemporary of Moses. If Moses indeed returned to Egypt after his 40 years being in Midian, in the Sinai, and he says to Pharaoh, "Let my people go," if we follow the biblical timeline, he's around 80 years old when he does this. And Rechmir is about the same age. So Moses and Rechmir would have grown up together in the school of the nobles, the house of the nobles. And there may have even, I have fictionalized a bit of conflict between them. They were once friends and became conflicted with each other. Now that's because Moses was, in a sense, raised up above him when Hatshepsut brought him into her household as a tutor to the royal daughter and named him Senenmut. Also gave him 92 royal titles, made him Grand Vizier, and Rechmir may have thought that that was his place and not Moses. Rechmir, after all, was born Egyptian. Moses was born Hebrew. And so now that's a fictionalizing I've done, but I don't think it's too far off the mark, because there was a lot of conflict, I believe, between Moses and Rechmir. Remember, and this is all as a sideline here, the Grand Viziers were also called Pharaoh in the place of Pharaoh, meaning everything belonged to the Grand Vizier save for the throne itself. And then when the Pharaoh was absent, for any sort of reason, off on a military campaign, traveling, ill, the Grand Vizier was the Pharaoh in the place of Pharaoh. This is what Senenmut would have been, what Moses would have been as Grand Vizier, Senenmut. And these men, I believe, conflicted with each other. I have a theory that if you remember the Exodus story, remember after the 10 plagues, remember after the Hebrews, after the Passover, the death of the firstborn, and the Israelites bug out. They're on their way to the promised land. Pharaoh releases them. That's all the scripture tells us, Pharaoh. But then it also shows a scene where Pharaoh, in the scripture, comes and he says, "Where are all my slaves? What happened to them?" I have a theory behind that. I'm going to give you this theory. This is off topic of the Magics. But here's Pharaoh. It's Amenhotep II, I believe, is who this is. He would have been about 23 years old at the dating of the Exodus. And he led 5 successful military campaigns in his first 5 years as Pharaoh. He became Pharaoh co-regent with his father, Tutmosis III, who was now elderly. And they were co-regents until his father died. At about age 18 for Amenhotep II, he became co-regent. Then his father passed away, and he became Pharaoh. And in his first 5 years, he had led these military campaigns, practically not out of his chariot the whole time. And my theory is this, is that it was Rechmir, the Grand Vizier, the Pharaoh in the place of Pharaoh, who was the Pharaoh who confronted Moses in the biblical story. Now, I have no proof of this other than to lay out events and say there's circumstantial evidence. So you could call this a speculation, a fictionalization. But I believe that Moses encountered Rechmir, and I believe that there was quite a conflict between them, possibly an older conflict that dated back to the days of their youth through their middle age, when Senenmut becomes the Grand Vizier in what Rechmir thought may have been his place. And so Moses, Senenmut, is elevated because of Hatshepsut. And when, I don't know if it's when she died, but when the biblical passage says Moses murdered the Egyptian and buried him in the sand, it's found out. And Pharaoh wants him caught. And so Moses bugs out. And he's gone for 40 years. But then he comes back after the burning bush experience where God says, all those who sought your life, the Pharaoh who sought your life is dead. Go back. And so now you've got Amenhotep II, the son of that Pharaoh, who is ruling, but he's off on military campaign, and his Grand Vizier is on the throne when Moses makes his case. Let my people go. Now, I'm speculating on that, but this is what I believe took place. I have no proof of this, but it's a speculation I'm researching still. So let's push that aside. I believe Rechmir was the man that Moses would have confronted. And you can find all these numerous paintings, and in the tomb chapel of Vizier Rechmir, we see painted images of serpent wands. And by the way, the date of this with Rechmir is around 1450 BCE. This had been about 4 to 5 years prior to the appearance, or prior to the Exodus. Well, by the way, may I add to my theory on Rechmir? You find he's in his 80s. He's 81 or 82 years old when he's the Grand Vizier for Amenhotep II. Remember, if that scenario took place and the Pharaoh Amenhotep was actually out on campaign and comes back and his slaves are gone, and it's under Rechmir that this took place, there's an interesting thing that happened. You don't see much of, you don't see any more of Rechmir after that time period. He's gone. So he either died or he was executed for what happened with the Hebrew slaves. But on his tomb painting, right around 1450 BC, give or take a few years, you see painted images of serpent wands. That's the whole point I was getting at. And recovered from a lector priest's tomb from 1900 BC was a bronze cobra wand, now in the British Museum. It's identical to the bronze serpent erected in the desert by Moses. Remember Moses, when the people were all bitten by serpents during the sojourn in the wilderness, and God said, erect a bronze serpent on a pole, and when people look to that, they'll be healed of the serpent's bites. And so there's a picture, and I've got it up here, but I don't have it to show you. I might as well. Why don't we show you this picture of this particular bronze serpent? So I'm going to save this and to show it to you right now as we're talking. And let me put that somewhere where I can grab it quick, and let's import it for you. This is an image of a bronze serpent, and this would be more than likely very similar to what Moses would have erected in the wilderness. That was a very Egyptian thing for him to do. And here it is. This is the bronze serpent. How did I label that? Did I label it serpent? Got to find it. There it is. All right. Now this is the bronze serpent from ancient Egypt. This shows you. It's a little blurry. This picture is because it's a little small, but and I'm blowing it way up. But there is the bronze serpent from Egyptian history around the same time. And that gives you an idea of how this bronze serpent may have looked when Moses erected it in the wilderness. And so this, once again, Moses in the wilderness, and he erects a bronze serpent for the people to look to in order for them to be healed of snake bites. And what is this? It's nothing other than Egyptian magic. And so it's a symbol of the thing that bit them. And there's ritual, symbolic magic here. All right, that's the bronze serpent. Now, getting back into this, this bronze serpent was something that would have been found, I believe, which was found, from about 1900 BCE. And this would have been about 400 years prior to the Exodus when this bronze serpent had been made. And from the temple of Seti I at Abydos, we see Thoth, Thoth, T-H-O-T-H, a god of magic. He's holding two staves wrapped in serpents. Even the personification of magic itself, the god Heka, can be seen painted on coffins, usually wielding multiple serpents to indicate his power. And in spell 885 of the coffin texts, we read this: "The serpent is in my hand and cannot bite me." So there is some magic behind this. Magic of the serpent. And perhaps more intriguing are the images on two seals that were discovered by Flinders Petrie in the last century, early last century, from the first decade of the 20th century. These depict a lector priest holding a crocodile in each hand in the classic Egyptian magician power pose. He's holding them with his fists down at his sides, and he's got crocodiles in his hands by the tails. And it's demonstrating his magical authority over them by grabbing and holding them up together. And centuries later, numerous protective stelae, such as the Metternich stela, are produced showing Horus as a young boy holding serpents and scorpions by the tail in each hand and standing atop two crocodiles, proving his power over these dangerous creatures. So by handling and controlling magical staffs, serpents and crocodiles, Moses and Aaron are very much acting as Egyptian lector priests and powerful rivals to the Pharaoh and his own magicians. So that's what we have to say about the crocodile, the serpent, the crocodile. This is all magic. To be able to have control over the magic. This was either God showing he's more powerful than the lector priests and the Heka, or it is showing that Moses and Aaron are knowledgeable in using the same magics. No matter which it was, they were utilizing the same magics that the Egyptians used in ancient times. And we're at the end of the first segment, folks. We got to go out to break, so sit tight. We're going to be right back with more of this.
Are you looking
Gang, we're back. Thanks for sitting on through that break. This is Scotty Roberts. You're listening to the Intrepid radio program right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. That's ODYSY1.com. Come on over and listen to the whole schedule they've got set up. It's an amazing 24/7 schedule of shows, and you'll find repeats of this show at later times in the day as well. And also, come on over to my YouTube channel. Watch the video broadcast, simulcast of this show in video. Video, simulcast in video. Not to be redundant or repetitively redundant, but there it was. And you can find that at my YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. And come on over and join the other Intrepheads in the live chat room going on right now as this show is broadcasting. So we want to pick up on this Passover magic. I want to look at now the parallels of Egyptian curses and the Exodus. So you find this magic is permeating throughout the whole of the Exodus story. And even with Moses, when I say that the Egyptian magics are things that he utilized, you will also find that much of the Hebrew law he wrote incorporated Egyptian spirituality, Egyptian law. You will see the layout of the temple. Remember the temple in Jerusalem? Well, there was a precursor to that. While they were wandering in the wilderness, they built the Ark of the Covenant, and they built the Tabernacle of the Covenant, which was a tented version made for traveling. That was a early layout of the temple in Jerusalem. And it was a tent. It had the outer court with the big tents around it, and it had a tent wall around it. And it had the inner court, it had the holy place, and then the Holy of Holies, where the Ark of the Covenant was placed. And even that was a layout of an Egyptian holy place. So Moses carried over, why not? He learned most of his spirituality, most of what he learned and believed while he was a prince in Egypt for the first 40 years of his life. Now, while crocodile showdowns conjured up in Pharaoh's court sound incredible enough, it was only the magical warm-up for a whole series of 10 curses that befell the Egyptian slavers. As far back as 1844, many parallels between the Passover plagues and the Egyptian texts have been recognized. There was a scholar, Brad C. Sparks, has identified more than 90 Egyptian texts that contain Exodus parallels. We talked about the Apure papyrus in the chat room last night. That's among them. Professor Gary Rensburg has reviewed these parallels in his article, Moses and the Magician. Exodus 1 through 15 repeatedly shows familiarity with Egyptian traditions, the biblical motifs of the hidden divine name, turning an inanimate object into a reptile, the conversion of water to blood, a spell of 3 days of darkness, the death of the firstborn, the parting of waters, and death by drowning are all paralleled in Egyptian texts, and for the most part, nowhere else. So, there's a precedent-setting plague parallels. There are precedent-setting plague parallels which take place. And let's go through some of these. Concerning the first plague, that is where Moses dips the rod into the Nile River and it turns the Nile River to blood. And there's important evidence in 2 Egyptian texts. First, the famous Admonitions of Ippur papyrus. That's the Ippur papyrus. And these were reportedly 1650 through 1550 is when these were originally written. It describes a man named Ippur, Ipuwer, who cries out to heaven that the world has been turned upside down and that he should remember his religious duties and kill his enemies. In one notable lament, Ippur says that, "Indeed the river is blood, yet men drink of it. Men shrink from human beings and thirst after water." This, of course, falls into a different context than the Exodus story. This is not about the Exodus. It's just showing a parallel in water being turned to blood. And it does suggest that the Torah author, Moses, the Torah being the first 5 books of the Old Testament, the Pentateuch as they're called, the books of Moses, was very familiar with this motif of the river is blood. Second, we read in the tale of the heavenly cow, that's in 1400 to 1200 BC. They're not quite sure the exact date. That's when this was dated to that period. It's about the goddess Sekhmet, who wreaks destruction upon an ungrateful humankind. She kills so many people that the Nile fills completely with their blood, into which she wades and begins drinking huge draughts of water. And so, attempting to stop the madness, her father, Ra, turns the Nile to red-colored beer, which makes her so drunk she passes out, thus averting the total destruction of the world. So, folks, next time you pick up a red beer and you drink red beer, just think you might be paralleling the one of the plagues of the first plague of the 10 during the Exodus period. So now you have to make a quick note on this too, relating to blood and the color red. The same word was used by the Egyptians in ancient times to describe the two, desher. D-E-S-H-E-R, the way it's spelled phonetically, desher. In ritual magic, it served to symbolize evil and chaos, and it was used to both ward off evil and to curse your enemies. So dangerous words were written in red ink, and priests would destroy red pots on which were written the names of their enemies. And in a similar way, by turning the Nile to blood, Moses and Aaron were cursing the Egyptian priests by rendering the water impure. Alternatively, by applying the color of evil to their door frames, the Israelites hoped it would ward off even greater evil. Just like the evil eye, the amulet is meant to ward off the actual evil eye. When Halloween, you look at the traditions of Halloween and Samhain, and how they use demonic face masks and jack-o'-lanterns to ward off demons and evil forces. It's the same kind of thing. So let's jump ahead now to the 9th plague for a second here, the plague of darkness. In the prophecy of Nefertiti, a text from the 12th dynasty, you're talking 1900 to 1800 BCE, we find a reference to a similar plague of darkness, caused by the invasion of foreign people. A chief lector named Nefertiti prophesies a future of chaos in Egypt, in which all natural norms are inverted, and he speaks of foreigners entering the land, bringing doom. And when describing how the land is destroyed and that there are none left who care for it, he comments that the sun is veiled and will not shine when the people would see. None will live when the sun is veiled by cloud. Now, is this metaphoric speak? Is it poetic language? Maybe. But it's a reference to the sky being darkened and it bringing death and evil with it. So now the most destructive plague, of course, was the 10th and the final one. This was the death of the firstborn. It was during this plague that the Israelites covered their doorframes with blood to protect their families from the destructive angel of the Lord. And it was this plague that finally, you want to say softened Pharaoh's heart? No, it probably broke down the hardness of his heart into letting the Israels go Interestingly, these themes appear in earlier Egyptian literature as well. I bet you didn't know that. The first, the idea of Pharaoh's heart softening related to the weighing of the heart. It's a ritual familiar to us from a classic scene in the Book of the Dead, in which Anubis weighs the heart of the deceased against the feather of truth of Mot. A hard heart would outweigh the feather and condemn the person to damnation. And we also have several Egyptian references to not only the night of the death of the firstborn, but even to the day of the death of the firstborn. Rensburg's documents show these examples, noting that the oldest comes from the pyramid texts. In the same pyramid of Unas, which we mentioned yesterday, where he picked up the staff and turned it into a crocodile, we have mentioned before, and we read this, it's the king who will be judged with him whose name is hidden on this day of the slaying of the firstborn. That's in the pyramid texts. The slaying of the firstborn. Him whose name is hidden, or he who shall not be named. No, it's not Voldemort. It's the angel of the Lord. I'm going to repeat that. Is the king who will be judged with him whose name is hidden on this day of the slaying of the firstborn. So could that mean that Pharaoh needed to soften his heart because it was too hard? Centuries later, we read from the coffin texts that I am he who will be judged with him whose name is written, or is hidden, on this night of the slaying of the firstborn. And that's a spell. That comes from spell 573 from 2000 BC. This would have been about 500 years prior to the Exodus. I am he who will be judged with him whose name is hidden on this night of the slaying of the firstborn. So it happened in Egypt before. And this night of the slaying of the firstborn and this day of the slaying of the firstborn, this is spell 136. And as Mordecai Gilula, the scholar who first commented on these verses back in 1977, noted this. He said, these passages from the coffin text and the pyramid texts are strong evidence that a mythological tale once circulated in which some or all of the firstborn in Egypt, whether gods, mortals, or animals, were slain on a certain day or night. Such a myth may very likely lie in the background of the biblical account. So the biblical account, I think, took place after this would have been written. So it's hailing back to this. There are so many things you will find in scriptures and throughout these magics that all hail back to earlier magics, earlier curses, earlier things. In the Egyptian examples, the notion seems to relate to judgment. And we can see a similar theme expressed during Passover, which was essentially Yahweh's judgment upon the unrelenting Egyptians. So these curses in the, and we could go through every one of those. Every one of the 10 plagues was a direct assault on one of the Egyptian gods, which, in a sense, he was bringing up those gods to demonstrate that God had power over them. That's what the story tells us. Now let's move on to the parting of the Red Sea. This is kind of the climax of the Passover story. And it was when Moses parts the waters of the Red Sea, or the Reed Sea. We brought this up in chat last night. The Red Sea, the great vast expanse of the Red Sea, while it looks small on a map, it probably wasn't the Red Sea itself. You couldn't cross that in a night with thousands of people, even if it was parted magically with waters. It's probably up in the north in the Sea of Reeds. And I have a map around here somewhere. Hold on, let me see. I think we've talked about this in the past. Let me see if I actually have this on hand or not. And I can show you once again. We talked about this when we were talking about the Exodus and so on. Let's see if I've still got that in here. This particular map. I may not have it. Give me 2 seconds and I'll see if I can look it up. If my stuff is still connected here. Let's see. I may not have this available for you to look at. It might be on a different disc. Okay, so we're going to skip it for now. Wait, let's see if we've got the Wadi Tumilat in here. Hold on a second. That would show us. Remember I mentioned the Wadi Tumilat as being this pathway. Oh, that might have been okay, let's see if it shows it here. It's looking for it. The Tumilat. It's looking for it, which means it probably can't find it. So, let's see if we find it coming up here. It's looking for it. It's trying to find it. But the Wadi Tumilat is that little arc that you can see, that arch of fertile ground, which is a trade route. A wadi is something that's filled with water on maybe usually one day out of the year. And from leaving the land of Goshen in the Nile Delta, they would have followed the Hebrews, the Israelites, the Wadi Tumilat, which exited down to the north of the Red Sea in front of the Bitter Lakes. Or the Red Sea is a mistranslation. It would have, I can't find the picture of the map, by the way. But it would have been, go look at a map of, go find a map of the Suez Canal, which runs north from the tip of the Red Sea to the Mediterranean. You're going to see the Wadi Tumilat off to the west, and the lake region, the Bitter Lakes, the shallow Bitter Lakes. This is, one of them was called also the Sea of Reeds, which was a mistranslation from the Red Sea. It wasn't the Red Sea itself coming up. It was the Bitter Lakes at the top. And this is where I believe that the Hebrews crossed over. And this is where, remember we talked about that geological event that could have taken place, where the strong east winds blow out of the Negev and have the effect of overnight parting the waters of the shallow Reed Sea. And if this is what happened, if Moses was opportunistic or knew it was happening, or was the power of God, whichever it was, the sea was parted there according to the story, and this is where they crossed over. Now, so the miracle is memorialized, this parting of the Red Sea, every year in the 1956 classic movie, which you can find on television riddled with 300 commercials, The Ten Commandments with Charlton Heston. And the escape from bondage is a legacy of Passover and of the Exodus, but it also offers a glimpse into Egyptian tales of magic. Now, if you want to see a really cool version of the parting of the Red Sea, for 1956 they did a pretty good job of it with the special effects of the day in the movie The Ten Commandments. You want to see a really cool version is the animated, the Prince of Egypt, and the way it shows the waters parted there. Also, I think one of the better renditions, if you will, in modern movies, modern cinematic magic, is the Ridley Scott movie, Exodus, Gods and Kings, with, what's his name? Same guy who played Batman. Why is his name escaping? He plays Moses in that movie. But it shows the parting of the Red Sea as being the result of a natural catastrophic event. And they were opportunistic. They were there at the time, and it saved them, and this was the power of God. So also remember in the passage, it says Moses stretched the rod over the waters. And it says that a strong east wind blew all night and parted the waters. It didn't happen like right in front of your face. It happened all night long, and they crossed on the dry ground. Was this that geological event taking place? Was it the power of God? I don't know. But whatever happened, the parting of the Red Sea has become a huge reference to Egyptian tales of magic. Now in Exodus 14, 15 through 16, and in 21 through 22 of that chapter, we read, "Then the Lord said to Moses, 'Raise your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea, to divide the waters so that the Israelites can go through the sea on dry ground.' Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and all that night the Lord drove back the sea with a strong east wind, and turned it into dry land. The waters were divided, and the Israelites went through the sea on dry ground, with a wall of water on their right and on their left." That's very interesting. It almost sounds like that geologic event. There's something, if I have a chance to find it here, I'm trying to think of the name of the stone. The El Arish stone. El Arish stone inscription. I want to show you a picture here. The El Arish stone is a stone that was found not long ago, and on the inscription, they found it. It was upholding or it's tipped on its side. I'm sorry, as a trough, feeding cattle. When somebody found this, a few decades back, and this El Arish stone has inscriptions all over it of a story that is a fairy tale that sounds an awful lot like elements of the Exodus. And I'm going to show you a couple of pictures. Let's see if I can find a large version of this to give you an idea of what this inscription looked like. The El Arish stone, I first was made aware of this through Shimka Yakubovici. You may have seen him, the Naked Archaeologist was his show 20 years ago. And El Arish inscription. I'm going to... the El Arish inscription. I want you to see this. On this stone, there was an inscription. It was a tale of without getting into a long, maybe we'll go through the tale of the El Arish stone, but it parallels many things that happened in the Exodus. And it talks about escaping slaves from Egypt by crossing the parted waters. And if I call this up, I'm going to show you this inscription on this stone as soon as I also show you the stone. Hang on a second here. This is the El Arish stone, and let me save that one as well. And I'm going to call these up for you to look at. I'm sorry those of you listening audibly can't see this as we're talking about it, but if you come over and look at the archive of this or come over to the show on the YouTube channel, you're going to be able to see these. Now, this is the El Arish stone. This was what was found as a cattle trough. And this is what it looks like. And inscribed all over this stone is this tale, this old fairy tale, this old myth. Now, there's the El Arish stone. And if you look very closely, you're going to see that this entire thing is full of inscriptions all down the left side there and the other side as well. So this is the El Arish stone that was found. Now, on this stone, it tells this tale, and in this tale, it speaks about the escaping of slaves. And this inscription shows these little hieroglyphs right here. Let me find this for you. El Arish. Let's see where I've got it. I would have said inscription. Where did I put that? There's that. There's that. El Arish inscription. Here we go. All right. Let me blow this one up. Now, it's a little hard to make out just because it's rough anyway to begin with, but at the same time, it's also, if you look here, I wish I had a pointer. Look on the left side of this inscription. Let me bring this down a little in size so you can kind of make it out a little better. If you see, there are, on the left side, you see 3 squiggly lines on top of each other. All right? Stacked on top of each other. Those 3 squiggly lines represented a vast body of water. So this is waters. And right before them, now remember they read from right to left. So right before them you see a diagonal symbol and another diagonal symbol to the right of that. Those 2 symbols are 2 knives. The 2 knives together are indicating slicing, cutting, parting. And so what this inscription reads from right to left is the cutting apart, the separation of waters. And so this is found on the El Arish stone. So this is part of, and there's a very brief hieroglyphic lesson for you as well. two knives cutting the waters, which stood for parting of waters. And this is in that mythology. And so let's get back to talking about this. So the waters were parted on the right and the left. However it took place, it took place. Was it a miracle? Was it a natural geological event? Or environmental event? Or astronomical event? We're not sure, but it represented magics in Egypt. So finally, after the group had passed through these parted waters, the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand over the sea so that the waters may come back upon the Egyptians." And this was Exodus 14:26. Now, it's been noted for over a century that this narrative contains nearly identical motifs to older Egyptian tales. From the same Westcar papyrus as the tale of the wax crocodile with Unas, we read another story of a lector priest named Djedded Monk. D-J-E-D-J-E-M-A-N-K-H. It's got the onk in it for life, and Djedded Monk. In this story, Pharaoh Senneferu is enjoying a day of leisure in his boat out on the lake, being rowed by beautiful maidens. What better way to go boating? Beautiful maidens rowing your boat. "It's good to be Pharaoh." So one of the maidens loses a pendant of the new turquoise that falls into the water. And insisting she have the pendant back, Senneferu calls for the magicians. The chief lector priest Djedded recited words of magic, the Heka. And thereupon was lifted up all the waters from the lake, from one side to the other, and the jewel was found lying in a potsherd. Now the water was 12 cubits deep, and 24 on the other side of the lake. Then he utilized and uttered words of magic, Heka, and he brought the waters of the lake back to their proper place. So amazingly, we see these images of walls of water in tomb paintings. For example, in KV 34, the tomb of Tutmosis III. Tutmosis III would have been the man who lived during the time of Senenmut, who I believe was Moses. And Hatshepsut, his stepmother, was the one who became Pharaoh, co-regent with him, took over for 20 plus years. Then when she died, he took over. And it was his son, Amenhotep II, that was the Pharaoh of the Exodus. So in the tomb of Tutmosis III, KV 34, we see in the Amduat, the fifth hour, a scene depicting a parted body of water separated by vertical lines. The inscription within the parted water reads this: "Water was once present and will return in deadly fashion." Now, I think it's worth taking a look at this, so I'm going to save this image as well. And we're almost out of time. We may have to close with this. But here, I want you to see this. This is on the tomb walls of Tutmosis III about this parting of waters. Not the Exodus, but a different story altogether. And this is what it looks like. And it is right. Let me find it. Right. Not there. Where'd it go? There it is. Painting 10. Boom. There it is. Let's blow this up. This is the painting on relief work from Tutmosis' tomb. You look at the bottom here. You see the sides of the lake. The water's piled up as walls on either side. And you show the snake symbol down in the middle. The snake perhaps relating to the rod and the staff. The Egyptian magics that took place. The parting of these waters to stand as a wall on the left and a wall on the right. So that, there you go, folks. If you want to see that and you're only listening audibly, come on over to the YouTube channel and watch the archive of this show, and you can find that image there. So to kind of wrap up for tonight, because we're really out of time now, when Moses extended his arm over the sea and he commanded his followers to be still and quiet, he's mirroring the ancient rituals known to herders who needed to ford rivers. In several tomb scenes from the Old Kingdom, we see lector priests assisting animal herders in fording crocodile waters. And so this is all old magical stuff and spells and incantations in Egyptian magic, Heka.